Let me tell you what the inside of an alien courthouse smells like. Not metaphorically, the actual smell. It was copper and wet stone, and something underneath both of those. Something that reminded me of the way a thunderstorm smells 30 seconds before the lightning hits. That specific charged air smell, except here it never broke. There was no lightning. The pressure just sat there, humming in the back of my sinuses for 6 hours straight while I waited in the holding chamber. And I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. Because everything I did in that room, I did with that smell in my nose and my hands folded in my lap and my heart rate somewhere between calm and lying about being calm. My name is Mara Vale. I run a one-person survey ship, the Red Line, modified cargo class, 12 years old, and opinionated about it. I had crossed into the Dresh corridor because my navigation system had a firmware disagreement with the Galactic Accord's most recent boundary update, which I would very much like to note was uploaded without notification on a Tuesday. The Dresh patrol intercepted me 40 minutes after crossing. I had time to eat half a protein bar before the tractor lock engaged. It tasted like peanut butter and poor life decisions. I finished it anyway. The Dresh are, and I need you to really hear this, deeply formal. I had done one prior transit job in the Outer Veth corridor, and my contact there had briefed me. She had said, "The Dresh do not yell, they do not threaten, but they have a word, Reshval, that means something like the formal decision to no longer extend patience." She had said, "Do not hear that word." I had said, I understood. I had not fully understood. You don't until you're in the room. The tribunal chamber was not large. That was the first thing that surprised me. I had expected scale, some grand architectural statement, something that said power in stone and height. Instead, it was maybe the size of a large conference room. 6 Dresh seated in a curved arrangement at a raised bench. No windows. The light came from panels recessed into the ceiling, and it was the color of deep water, that particular blue-green that isn't quite either, the color of something that has never seen sunlight and doesn't miss it. Everything it touched looked cold, including me, I imagine. They had given me food while I waited. This is worth noting. A tray brought by a clerk who placed it without ceremony and left without speaking. The food was 3 portions of something that looked like compressed gray-green material and smelled like seaweed and iron filings. I ate all of it, deliberately and not fast. I made myself go slowly, like someone with manners, like someone who was a guest and knew it. It tasted like the ocean floor tastes in your nightmares. Deep, mineral, and absolutely certain of its own importance. I ate every bite. I set the tray at the edge of the table, centered, the same way I'd been taught to set a table as a kid, because my mother believed in that kind of thing, and because it was the only signal I had available to me in that room that said, "I am not afraid. I am a person. I have been raised to behave at tables." The lead adjudicator, I later learned her title translated as something like First Voice of Resolutions, had watched me eat from across the room. I noticed her noticing. I did not look up. I finished. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. When the session opened, the charges were read in Dresch Standard, with a translation running through the earpiece they'd given me. Unauthorized boundary transit. Failure to respond to initial interception signal. That one was the firmware issue, and I had the logs to prove it. Potential survey infringement on a protected corridor. The last charge was the serious one. Survey infringement carries asset forfeiture under Accord law. That's my ship. That's everything. The first voice spoke without looking at me directly. Dresch address a speaker by orienting their crest toward them rather than their eyes, and hers was angled roughly 15 degrees off my face. I had read this in a cultural brief so old it still used the pre-Accord system designations. I had read it anyway. I knew what it meant. You are being spoken to. You are not yet being judged. There is a difference. First voice, Tribunal Record, Session 14-Veth-7. The vessel registered to Mara Vale, Terran designation, entered protected corridor without authorization. We will hear the account. You will speak to the facts only. Mara Vale, do you understand the parameters of this hearing? Now here's the thing about that question. On the surface, it's procedural. Yes or no. But I had been in that room for 6 hours before the session opened. I had heard the tribunal conduct 2 prior hearings through the wall. The walls were not thick, and the Dresch, who do not yell, apparently also do not consider volume a courtesy. Both prior cases had been other non-Dresch travelers. Both had answered yes to the opening question immediately. Both had then launched into their explanations in the rapid, overlapping way that most species do when they're nervous and desperate to establish innocence. I had watched the energy in the room through the gap under the door. I had watched the crest angles shift, shorter and shorter orienting time, faster dismissals. The Dresch did not want explanations. They wanted to see who understood what a hearing was for. I let exactly 3 seconds pass. Mara Vale. I understand that I am here to assist your process, not to direct it. Yes. The first voice's crest moved, just slightly, left of center, then back. I did not know exactly what that meant. I knew it was not nothing. They went through the charges methodically. On the boundary transit, I presented the firmware logs, time-stamped, unaltered, filed through my ship's black box, which the patrol had pulled and verified. The clerk who read the log aloud did it without inflection. When he finished, there was a pause. Not long, 4 seconds. In a Dresch tribunal, I had read, silence belongs to the bench. You do not fill it. The previous travelers through that wall had filled it. I watched my own hands in my lap and counted the 4 seconds and said nothing. The second voice, the one on the far left, who had not spoken yet, shifted his crest toward me for the first time. Full orientation. I felt it the way you feel it when someone at a party who has been watching you all evening finally decides to cross the room. Something had changed. Second voice. The firmware record is consistent. You did not receive the interception signal. A pause. Why did you not conduct a manual boundary check before entry? This was the trap. Not a malicious trap, a diagnostic one. He wanted to see what I would do with a question that had no clean answer. I had made a procedural error. The question was whether I would rationalize it, minimize it, or redirect it. Those were the losing moves. I had watched them lose through the wall already. Mara Vale. I did not. That is a gap in my protocol, and I take responsibility for it. My firmware failure does not excuse the manual check I should have run independently. I want to be accurate with you about that. The room did a thing. I cannot fully explain the thing. The light didn't change. It was still that cold, deep water blue-green, still pressing down on every surface with its particular certainty. The copper storm smell didn't shift, but something in the arrangement of the 6 bodies at that bench changed, in the way that a room full of people changes when a conversation has turned from performance to something real. I had spent years in shipping depots, in transit hubs, in every underfunded regional spaceport from here to the outer Veth, and I knew what it felt like when a room decided you were worth talking to rather than processing. It feels like air pressure releasing, like the 30 seconds before a storm, finally breaking. I take responsibility for it. I want to be accurate with you about that. 7 words that cost nothing. 7 words that changed everything. The survey infringement charge was the serious one, and we came to it last. The corridor I had transited contained a protected research site, Dresch, Cartographic Heritage Designation, which I had not known and which my outdated charts did not reflect. The patrol had found my active survey array running, standard practice for me in unmapped corridors, not standard practice in someone else's carefully preserved space. The first voice presented this with the particular stillness that I had come to understand was not coldness, but weight. She was not angry. She was holding something heavy and asking me to understand how heavy it was. First voice: your array recorded data from a site under heritage protection. Under Accord statute, that data and the vessel that collected it are subject to forfeiture. I had thought about this moment for 6 hours in the holding room. I had thought about every version of the argument I could make. Technical, procedural, rights-based, appeal to the firmware defense as mitigating context. I had thought about all of them and put them aside one by one. Because here is the thing about arguments. You make them when you believe the other party needs to be convinced. And I had spent 6 hours reading this room and what I understood about the Dresch, from the briefs, from the wall, from the way the second voice had gone still when I admitted my protocol gap, was that they did not need to be convinced. They needed to be met. I reached into the front pocket of my flight suit. The clerk by the door tensed. I moved slowly. I pulled out my survey drive, the physical unit, not a copy, and placed it on the edge of the table in front of me. I pushed it forward. I left my hand flat on the table, open, next to it. The gesture that every species in the known accord apparently makes and apparently means the same thing. This is yours if you want it. Mara Vale. I cannot give back the transit. I cannot undo the array running. What I can give you is every record it collected, complete, unedited, not copied. You have my word on the last part, and you have no reason to take my word, but I'm giving it anyway. I paused. I came into your space by accident. I ate your food and I waited, and I told you the truth about my protocol gap, because that is what I would want from someone who had come into mine. I would like to go home, but I understand that is your decision, not mine. 6 seconds of silence, Dresch silence, which is not empty. It has weight and texture, like the copper storm smell, like the blue-green light. I counted it. I did not fill it. I kept my hand open on the table. The first voice looked at the drive. She looked at me. Full crest orientation, both eyes, the real kind of looking that I had not received until this moment. Something moved across her face that I did not have a word for in any language I spoke. You understand that this hearing was not a performance. I know. Most do not. They kept the drive. They updated my charts at their own expense. A new firmware package, current as of that morning, loaded onto the Red Line's nav system before they released me. The clerk who handed me back my flight bag also handed me a sealed container of the gray-green food. I looked at it. He looked at me. His crest angled briefly toward me. I took it. I said thank you in Dresch Standard, which I had looked up during the 6-hour wait on a phrase guide I downloaded 3 years ago and never deleted. His crest moved in the way that I had not seen a Dresch crest move in my entire time in that building. It went up, just slightly, just enough. I walked out of the Dresch conclave into a corridor that smelled like recycled air and metal, and I stood there for a moment with the container of alien food in my hand and my ship at the far end of the docking arm. And I thought about my mother's table. I thought about a 14-year-old brief on crest angles. I thought about 6 hours of listening to a room before I said a single word in it. I thought about a word I had not heard. Reshval. The formal decision to no longer extend patience. I had not heard it. I had not heard it because I had walked into someone else's court, in someone else's light, eating someone else's food that tasted like the bottom of the sea, and I had decided, before I opened my mouth once, that this was not my room to take over. It was my room to read. And humans, whatever else we are, whatever the rest of the galaxy thinks of our firmware updates and our modified cargo ships and our one-person survey operations on the fringe of everything, humans are very, very good at reading a room. I ate the food on the flight home, all of it. It tasted exactly the same as it had in the holding chamber, copper and deep water and something electric. It tasted like a room that had almost gone one way and had gone another. I finished it before I hit the first relay beacon. I put the container in the recycler. I set my new charts to active and felt the nav system hum, clean, updated, current, under my hands. I went home. File, Vale M, Tribunal Incident 14 Veth 7. Outcome, released. Charges dismissed. No forfeiture. Survey drive, retained by Dresch Conclave. Heritage Protocol nav update, installed. Current. Food container, consumed. No further questions.